There are few things more humiliating in this life than getting thrown off your own land, but let me tell you, nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the feeling when the sheriff shows up to your front gate holding eviction papers signed by a woman who doesn't even own a goat, much less a ranch. I stood there, dust still swirling from his tires, looking past him at Karen, my next-door nightmare, perched on her white porch swing with a glass of lemonade and a grin so wide you'd think she just won the state fair pie contest. But this wasn't just another one of her nosy neighbor antics. No, this time Karen claimed she sold my ranch to her so-called cousin, and somehow the law was buying it. The day had started like any other. I'd just gotten back from a cattle auction 3 towns over. My truck was caked in dust, the bed loaded with supplies, and I was thinking about how badly I needed a shower and a cold beer. But as I crested the ridge leading down to the ranch, I spotted something that made me tap the brakes so hard I almost left skid marks in the gravel. A giant red and white "For Sale" sign was planted right at the front gate. Below it, in bold letters, was Karen's name and her phone number. Now, I've been known to have a sense of humor, but even I wasn't laughing at that. I threw the truck into park, stormed over, and yanked the sign clean out of the dirt. It wasn't 5 minutes later when Sheriff Buck's cruiser rolled up, slow and deliberate like he knew he was about to step into a pile of trouble. Buck's been around these parts longer than most of the oak trees, so when he took off his hat and scratched his head, I could tell even he wasn't sure what he'd walked into. He stepped out and handed me a folded paper. "I need you to come with me for a minute," he said, like he was asking me to help move a sofa, not leave my own home. I unfolded it and saw the words "Notice to Vacate" stamped right at the top and just about dropped it. Karen didn't waste a second before sashaying over to the fence line, waving like the Queen of England. "Oh, Sheriff, don't be too hard on him," she cooed. "It's always hard for folks to let go. I know it's tough, losing the ranch, but Cousin Bobby is just so excited to move in." Cousin Bobby? Since when did Karen have family who weren't flat on the pages of some soap opera script? I turned to Buck, trying to steady my voice. "Buck, this is my ranch. I bought it with my own money, worked it with these 2 hands, buried my father under the oak tree up by the ridge, and I sure as hell didn't sell it." Buck looked as torn as an old saddle. "I know," he said under his breath. "But you got paperwork?" Of course I had paperwork. I kept the deed in a steel safe under the stairs, same place it had been since the day Dad passed it down to me. I left Buck and Karen at the gate and bolted inside. The place looked untouched, just as I'd left it. I spun the dial on the safe, pulled open the door, and... nothing. The safe was empty. I stumbled back like I'd been shot. My stomach dropped into my boot. No deed. No title. Just empty shelves and cold steel. And through the open window, I could hear Karen's syrupy voice loud and clear. "Oops," she said with a giggle. "Looks like someone's been robbed. How unfortunate." When I stormed back outside, I could feel the blood pounding behind my eyes. Buck was shifting from one foot to the other, clearly wishing he'd taken the day off. "Without the deed," he said, "and with this document Karen gave me saying she sold it to her cousin, I've got no choice. You'll have to leave for now until we sort it out legally." Karen's grin stretched even wider as she leaned against the fence. "You're welcome to stay at the Motel 6, sugar. I hear they've got vacancy." The humiliation hit harder than any punch. I'd worked this land since I could swing a hammer. Every fence post, every barn plank, every cow wandering that pasture had my sweat in it. And now, in front of half the county, I was being treated like some trespasser. I loaded up what little I could into the bed of my truck and drove past Karen, who had the audacity to blow me a kiss like she hadn't just pulled the rug out from under me. But just as I turned out of the driveway and crested that same ridge, something caught my eye. Tucked high up in the oak by the house, right near the second-story window, was a trail camera, one I'd set up months ago after Karen's last stunt with the boundary lines. I had completely forgotten about it, and if it was still running, it might have just caught the most important footage of my life. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Karen, I muttered, staring down at the ranch as the sun dipped low and painted the fields orange, you just started a war you can't finish. And war was exactly what she was about to get. By the time the morning sun broke over the hills, Cousin Bobby had arrived in all his glory, and let me tell you, he didn't look like he knew a cow from a kitchen sink. He rolled up in a shiny, city slicker pickup that still had the dealership sticker on the window. The bed wasn't full of feed or tools, but plastic-wrapped furniture and boxes labeled "Fragile" in big letters. He hopped out wearing pressed jeans, a leather vest without a single scuff on it, and a pair of snakeskin boots so new they still had the price tags dangling. He stood there, looking over the ranch like he was about to star in a cheap commercial. Then came Karen, marching beside him like she'd just crowned him king of the prairie. Sheriff Buck and a couple of deputies were still hanging around, looking about as thrilled as wet cats. I kept my distance, parked near the edge of the road, arms crossed, watching this whole circus unfold. Karen waved papers like they were golden tickets. "All official, Sheriff," she said. "Bobby's got the ownership certificate right here, and he's ready to move in." Buck rubbed the bridge of his nose and glanced over at me, his eyes practically begging for me to pull a miracle out of my pocket. But without the deed, my words were about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Bobby strutted up to Buck, handing him the paperwork with a crooked grin. Buck flipped through it, squinting at the obviously doctored certificate that looked like Karen printed it on her home printer between episodes of her soap operas. But law's law, and with no hard proof from me, Buck had no choice but to keep playing referee. I spent the rest of the day watching Bobby stumble around like a calf on ice, pretending he knew what he was doing. He tried to back a horse trailer into the barn and ended up knocking down the side fence. He stepped in fresh manure and cursed loud enough for the goats to scatter. Karen just laughed and sipped sweet tea from her usual spot on her porch. They might have had the paperwork, but it was clear neither of them knew the first thing about running a ranch. I wasn't about to just roll over. That evening, I gathered up every scrap of evidence I could find. Tax records going back years, old newspaper clippings about my dad buying the land, even family photos showing us rebuilding the barn after that big storm in '09. I dug up emails with the bank, receipts from the feed store, and anything else that could prove the ranch was rightfully mine. When I thought I had enough, I headed straight for Sheriff Buck's office. Buck, bless him, was sitting behind his desk looking like he hadn't slept since yesterday. I spread out the pile in front of him. "This is everything," I said. "It proves that land's mine." He sifted through the stack, nodding slowly, but I could see the problem in his eyes. "It's good," he said. "But without the deed itself, the courts won't move fast. Karen's got just enough paperwork to stall us, and you know how Judge Harlan is. Slow as molasses and twice as sticky." Just as I was about to storm out and wring Karen's neck myself, Bobby slipped up in the most unexpected way. Through Buck's office window, I spotted Bobby and Karen arguing on the sidewalk. Bobby, in his usual clueless way, blurted out loud enough for half the street to hear, "I ain't your cousin, Karen. I'm not calling you aunt one more time." Karen smacked him on the arm and shushed him quick, but the damage was done. Buck's head snapped up, eyes wide, and I swear if he had coffee, he'd have spit it across the desk. "Well," Buck said, standing up slowly, "ain't that something?" It was the first real crack in their little scheme. If Bobby wasn't her cousin, then this whole deal was looking less like a family sale and more like a fraud. Still, Buck warned me that without concrete proof, and more importantly, the deed, Karen would just spin another web of lies. We needed to catch them red-handed. As if things couldn't get worse, the very next morning, Buck served me a temporary eviction order. He hated every second of it, but the judge wasn't willing to wait without the deed. I had 48 hours to vacate the ranch or face trespassing charges. That's how I found myself loading up the essentials into my old trailer and moving into the feed shed behind the general store, complete with creaky cots and 2 goats who were far too interested in sharing the space with me. Sitting there on that splintered cot, the humiliation washed over me again. Me, the rightful owner, sleeping among sacks of grain and hay while Karen paraded around the ranch like she was queen of the cattle drive. I couldn't go to the bank without the deed. The judge wasn't moving fast enough. And the town, as much as they loved me, didn't dare cross Karen too loudly after she bragged about having connections higher up. That night, while the goats snored beside me, I stared at the ceiling and remembered the trail camera. I'd set it up months ago to catch coyotes sneaking around the henhouse, but it had a clear view of the house. Maybe, just maybe, it caught something. At first light, I hiked back through the woods, careful to stay out of sight, and climbed up to the old oak where the camera was tucked away. It was still there, blinking like it was begging me to check it. I popped the SD card out and hightailed it back to town. In the back room of Buck's office, we sat hunched over his computer as the footage loaded. My heart pounded as the timestamp flicked to the night before I found the deed missing. And there they were, Karen and Bobby, creeping around like teenagers pulling a prank. Bobby used a crowbar to jimmy open the window, and clear as day, they rifled through the safe and left with the deed in hand. Karen even held it up to the camera and did a little victory dance before walking out like she owned the place. Buck's eyes nearly bugged out of his head. "You got him," he whispered. I sat back, finally able to breathe for the first time in days. But I knew Karen wouldn't go down easy. Not without one final show. And something told me she wasn't done scheming just yet. The war was just beginning. The footage was pure gold, but knowing Karen, she'd find a way to squirm out of it unless we played this smart. Sheriff Buck leaned back in his chair, chewing the end of his pencil like he was sizing up a prize bull at the county fair. He knew Karen well enough to realize that catching her red-handed on tape was one thing, but making sure it stuck in front of Judge Harlan was a whole other rodeo. Buck suggested we sit tight for a day or two, give Karen just enough rope to hang herself properly. I didn't like the sound of waiting while that snake strutted around on my land, but Buck assured me that if we rushed it, she'd find some slick-talking lawyer to twist things around. I agreed, reluctantly, though every hour spent in that dusty feed shed felt like salt on an open wound. Meanwhile, Karen and Bobby wasted no time making a spectacle out of their so-called ownership. Bobby drove my tractor straight through the front fence trying to mow the back pasture. He then got himself tangled in the barbed wire so bad that old man Tom from the next ranch over had to cut him loose with bolt cutters. Karen, on the other hand, invited half the town over for what she called a ranch revival party. Flyers went up around town. Live music, free drinks, barbecue, the whole 9 yards, all to show off her shiny new property. The nerve of that woman. It took every ounce of patience I had not to march right up there and drag them both off the land myself. But Buck's words kept ringing in my ears. Let her make the mistake, then we'll pounce. As the so-called party approached, I spotted Buck's plan starting to take shape. He spent the next day on the phone, quiet but determined. Turns out, Karen had bigger plans than just hosting a backyard hoedown. Buck learned through the grapevine that she was meeting with a slick-looking fella from the city, a real estate developer, during the party. Rumor was she planned to sell the ranch out from under me to make a quick buck. It made sense. Karen never cared about cattle or crop. She wanted dollar signs, and Bobby was just the muscle, or lack thereof. What Karen didn't know was that Buck had called in some old friends from the state investigator's office, who were more than happy to blend into the crowd disguised as party guests. When party day finally rolled around, I watched from a distance, crouched behind a patch of cedars with Buck and 2 state investigators. It was a bizarre sight, seeing my ranch decked out like some kind of Western-themed amusement park. Bobby was wearing a ridiculous BOLO tie and stumbling over a microphone trying to hype up the crowd, while Karen pranced around like she was the grand marshal of the homecoming parade. The barbecue smoke drifted through the air, mingling with the sounds of a local band playing off-key country tunes. Folks from town had shown up in droves, most of them suspicious, but too curious to stay away. Then, right on cue, the developer arrived. He looked every bit the part, sharp suit, fancy watch, and a portfolio under his arm. Karen greeted him like royalty, practically dragging him across the pasture to the old barn where she'd set up a makeshift office. Bobby followed behind, nervously adjusting his belt buckle. Buck signaled to the state boys who casually slipped through the crowd, blending right in with the locals. Inside the barn, things went exactly how Buck predicted. The investigator, posing as the developer, pretended to be thrilled with the property. Karen, in her usual smug fashion, laid it on thick, waving forged documents around like they were fresh from the courthouse. "The place has been in the family for years," she chirped. "You won't find a better deal west of the river." Bobby just nodded along, clearly out of his depth. From outside, Buck and I listened through a wireless receiver patched into the fake developer's lapel. It was equal parts satisfying and infuriating hearing Karen lie through her teeth so easily. She even tossed in some nonsense about planning to turn the ranch into a luxury resort. I nearly laughed out loud. Karen couldn't manage a lemonade stand, much less a resort. Then came the big moment. The developer asked for Karen to sign the final sale document. Without hesitation, she scribbled her signature across the papers and handed them over, sealing her own fate. Buck didn't waste another second. He gave the nod, and the state investigators stepped forward, badges flashing, declaring the deal null and void and Karen under investigation for fraud. The look on her face was worth every sleepless night I'd had in that shed. Her eyes darted around, searching for someone to blame, before settling on Bobby, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Bobby, do something," she screeched. Bobby, in true Bobby fashion, immediately folded. "It was all her idea," he shouted, throwing his hands up like a schoolboy caught stealing from the cookie jar. The crowd outside heard the commotion and flooded toward the barn. Karen's face went beet red as neighbors and townsfolk gathered to watch the show. Buck stepped forward, calmly reading Karen her rights as he cuffed her. Bobby got the same treatment shortly after, despite his frantic pleas that he was just along for the ride. The developer, now back in his real role as a state investigator, assured the crowd that the rightful owner, me, would have the ranch back in no time. I walked into the barn just as Karen was being led out, hands cuffed behind her back. She locked eyes with me, spitting mad. "This isn't over," she snarled. But the whole town could see the writing on the wall. Karen was done, and no amount of fast talking was going to change that. Bobby shuffled past me, mumbling apologies under his breath like they'd do him any good. As Buck secured them both in the back of his cruiser, I stood there taking it all in. The ranch, the people, the land that had been mine since I was knee-high. It wasn't just about property. It was about legacy, about my father's hard work, and about not letting snakes like Karen ruin what good folks built with blood, sweat, and grit. The party fizzled out faster than Bobby's excuses. The townsfolk offered sheepish goodbyes, some of them apologizing for not stepping up sooner, but I didn't hold it against them. Karen had fooled plenty of folks before. The important thing was she wasn't fooling anyone anymore. I stood there as the sun dipped low behind the hills, knowing full well the fight wasn't just won, it was finished. But little did I know, there was still one surprise waiting for me on that old ranch, and it was hiding where I least expected it. The next morning, with the dust of yesterday's chaos still settling, I finally walked the ranch like I owned it again, not just in my heart but on paper too. Sheriff Buck had made sure the deed was returned straight to me, and I'd locked it tighter than a tick in a hound's ear. Karen and Bobby were cooling off in the county jail, and the town couldn't stop talking about the spectacle. Folks who had barely tipped their hats before now stopped to shake my hand, some even apologizing for ever doubting me. I wasn't bitter. I'd known this land longer than I'd known most of them. It felt good just to feel the dirt under my boots again without Karen's smug face hovering around. I spent the morning checking on things, mending the fence Bobby tore down and making sure none of the livestock had wandered too far during the chaos. The cattle were skittish but settled once they saw me. Even the goats, who had become my unwanted roommates during the whole mess, seemed content to be back where they belonged. Everything was finally where it should be, except for one thing. When I passed by the old tool shed, something caught my eye. The door was ajar, and I knew I hadn't left it that way. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside, half expecting to find another one of Bobby's half-finished disasters. Instead, there, tucked behind a stack of rotting wood and rusted tools, was a small metal safe I'd never seen before. It wasn't part of the equipment my father left behind, and it sure wasn't something I remembered putting there. The lock was busted, likely from Bobby's failed attempt to force it open during his fumbling around. I pried it the rest of the way and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in brittle oilcloth, were 3 leather pouches and a faded journal. I opened the first pouch, and felt my heart just about stop. Gold coins. Old ones too, stamped with markings from the late 1800s, likely from the mining rush that swept through this region. The other 2 pouches were just as heavy and just as full. My fingers shook as I thumbed through the journal, realizing it was my grandfather's. The entries told the story plain as day. Back in the 1940s, he had stumbled upon a forgotten vein left behind by the miners, pulled out what he could, and hid the proceeds under the very shed I was standing in. I sat there on the dirt floor, staring at the gold like it was some kind of fever dream. After all the mess with Karen and Bobby, after sleeping in a feed shed and fighting tooth and nail to hold on to what was mine, here I was staring at a fortune left behind by my own blood. No one knew about it, not even my father, judging by the journal entries. My grandfather must have intended to tell someone one day but took the secret to his grave. Later that day, Buck dropped by, still chuckling about how Karen's tantrum was the highlight of his week. I showed him the gold, and he nearly swallowed his toothpick. "Well, I'll be," he said, turning one of the coins over in his hand. "Looks like you got more than your ranch back." We both knew right then it wasn't just about the money. It was about the legacy. My family had poured every ounce of themselves into this land, and it turned out the land gave something back, just when I needed it most. News about Karen spread faster than wildfire. Not only was she facing charges for fraud, breaking and entering, and theft, but Bobby had completely thrown her under the wagon, confessing every detail once the handcuffs clicked. Turns out, Karen had been planning this little stunt for nearly a year, watching me, learning when I left for auctions, and even snooping through town records looking for loopholes to exploit. Too bad for her, she forgot one important thing about country folks: we may move slow, but we don't miss much. The judge didn't take kindly to Karen's antics either. Within weeks, she was sentenced to community service and a healthy pile of fines that'd keep her wallet empty for years. Bobby got off a little lighter but was banned from stepping foot on my ranch again, which suited me just fine. The sight of him alone was enough to sour fresh milk. With the drama behind me, I finally got back to ranching the way it was meant to be. The neighbors who once gossiped now showed up with pies and offers to help mend fences. The cattle calmed down. The goats settled back into their usual mischief without me as their bunkmate. And me? I slept like a baby for the first time in weeks, knowing full well the ranch was mine, free and clear. But if I'm being honest, the best part wasn't Karen's arrest or the gold hidden under the shed. It was standing at the ridge one evening, looking out over the pasture with the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, knowing my father and grandfather had stood in that very same spot, dreaming of what this land could be. I could almost hear them chuckling about the whole ordeal, proud that I'd stood my ground and fought for what was ours. Karen and Bobby became the town joke after that. Folks said you could still hear Karen muttering about ungrateful ranchers, while picking up trash along the highway in her bright orange vest. As for me, I didn't need revenge. The land gave me everything I needed, just like it always had. I took one last walk up to the old oak where my father was buried, gold coins and journal in hand. I set one coin on his gravestone, a token of the secret he never knew and the battle we'd won together. Don't worry, I said quietly, I'll keep it safe. And I meant it. Because no matter how many Karens try to take what's yours, if you stand tall and trust your roots, they'll never